think a lot of our viewers will be able to guess, but Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, Jess, for the last month, the mainstream media has set its sights on President Joe Biden, generating a massive and unusual amount of negative coverage in order to end his doomed candidacy. But now Biden is out and Vice President Kamala Harris is in, and things have returned to normal. Consider this hagiographic recap of Harris's consequential weekend by CNN's Edward Isaac Dover. Quote, through all her calls at the Naval Observatory, Harris wore a hooded Howard University sweatshirt, workout sweats, and sneakers, reported Dover on X. They got pizza and salad for dinner. She went with her favorite topping, anchovies. Nature, in other words, is healing. Harris is now the beneficiary of a veritable torrent of fluffy, positive press. The Washington Post praised her Spotify playlist and her sense of style. Subtle changes to her wardrobe selections relay a new gloss of power and polish, while defending her against conservative accusations that she was picked for the Veep spot because of her race and gender. Media institutions such as The Guardian, CBS, and NBC also rushed to proclaim Harris a beloved icon of young people. Politico hailed her as Kamala Harris, Gen Z meme queen. This verdict is largely connected to pop star Charli XCX's endorsement, possibly, of Harris. The singer wrote on X that Kamala is brat, which is the name of her hit summer album, and some subject of scrutiny on Rising in the past few days. Now, it's not hard to imagine the comparatively energetic, active, and youthful Harris as a more appealing figure than the aged incumbent who occupied the top of the ticket until this weekend. Even so, a recent Quinnipiac University poll, conducted, however, before Harris became the candidate, showed her losing the youth vote to Donald Trump in a hypothetical matchup. Another analysis by CNN's Harry Enton pointed out that Harris has not matched Biden's 2020 numbers in terms of youth approval. These results may be outliers, and there's certainly time for her to improve. She has only been the presumptive candidate, again, for a few days. And as the official Democratic nominee for president, she will be expected to ultimately carry the under 35 crowd. That would not be a surprising result at all. Still, it's a cautionary tale. Vibes are not the same thing as votes. The truth is that Harris is remarkably untested on the national stage. When she ran for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020, she received little traction and was among the first major candidates to drop out. Julian Castro, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders, all of those people outlasted her, though she ultimately withdrew from that race before primary voting even took place. When a September 2019 poll from Emerson College showed she would lose her home state of California, the primary in that state, the poll had her in 5th place behind Biden, Sanders, Warren, and Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang was beating her in the state of California. So what's behind Harris's lack of popular appeal? For one thing, it's hard to know what she actually stands for. As California's top prosecutor, she was hardly a progressive. According to Harris, she sought statewide office in order to institute a plan on truancy. It's from her book. She said said plan involved locking up parents of kids who skipped school. Then, during her ill-fated presidential campaign, she decreed herself unburdened by what has been, to borrow a popular Kamala-ism, and embraced the George Floyd movement's demand for more progressive policing. At best, one can say that the American people do not understand what exactly she stands for. She'll now have the opportunity to make that clear. As the vice presidential candidate, Harris was ultimately part of the winning ticket in 2020. But for the vast majority of Biden's presidency, Harris has polled worse than her boss. It was not until recent months, when public approval of Biden truly collapsed, that she started to seem like the safer bet. In the weeks since Biden's disastrous debate performance laid bare the reality of his advanced age and cognitive decline, Democratic leaders, elite donors, and the mainstream media have dramatically shoved the president aside and christened Harris as the new standard bearer. They have done this with the nominal support of the rake and file. As polls have shown, most Democrats did want Biden to bow out. But unlike Biden, Harris does not have a long track record of winning national elections. She's an unproven commodity at best. One of Harris's greatest assets, however, will be favorable media coverage. Indeed, mainstream reporters are already trying to protect her on one of her most vulnerable issues. On Wednesday, Axios accused Republicans of unfairly faulting Harris for the dysfunction at the U.S. southern border, writing, "The Trump campaign and Republicans have tagged Harris repeatedly with the border czar title, which she never actually had." This notion that Harris was never named border czar is contradicted by earlier reporting in Axios. An April 14th, 2021 article by Axios reporter Shauna Chen explained that, quote, Harris, appointed by Biden as border czar, said she would be looking at the root causes that drive migration. That was not a one-off, by the way. Axios published 3 separate articles, all referring to Kamala Harris as the border czar, using that specific language. Caught red-handed, Axios demurred and published the following correction. The article has been updated and clarified to note that Axios was among the news outlets that incorrectly labeled Harris a border czar in 2021. They would rather say they were wrong than admit she was the border czar. Now, the updated article says that, quote, border czar was an unofficial moniker, as if the difference matters. The truth, let's just talk about the truth, is that Harris was, in fact, assigned to lead the administration's handling of that specific issue, and that is now inconvenient for the campaign since immigration and border security is Trump's most winning issue. Sorry about that, but it is, in fact, the truth. So this is a very good example, I think, Jessica, of the kinds of favorable coverage she is likely to get. This is going to be Barack Obama all over again. But the border czar thing was particularly hilarious to me. They called her the border czar. They called her the border czar over and over and over and over again. Yes, it was unofficial. She wasn't like, she didn't, receive the keys to the, she didn't bow down and have Biden go, I dub thee border czar, with like a scimitar in his hand. But she was tasked with handling border stuff, has perceived to have not done a good job with it, and the media just wanted to totally, we were never at war with East Asia, that whole thing into the past.
Are migration numbers down over the southern border, Robby?
They are.
They are.
They are.
And didn't they deport more Haitian immigrants than any administration prior?
Yeah, Biden's the deporter-in-chief, for sure.
And didn't they also have more border patrol than the Trump administration under the Biden administration?
If you say so, I don't know.
That's true. That's one of Biden's policies as well. I just think it's a little bit...
So the American people are wrong to be so frustrated with Biden's border policies, is what you're saying.
I think they're wrong to assume that he was progressive or that we have an open border like we always hear about. We absolutely do not have an open border under Biden. And on the left, she's criticized for being too tough on the border, the Biden administration being too tough on the border.
I guess she should own her successes then. She should be mad that people on her own side in the media are trying to pretend she was not in charge of the border.
I think they're just
so well.
Being honest and saying, like, this is the time she was in charge of the border, this is the time she wasn't. Similarly, Joe Biden was tasked with the economic recovery post-financial crisis.
I don't think they're being honest. They're trying to pretend that she was never the border czar. I mean, it's a matter of semantics. That was a policy issue put under her purview. Right? I mean, it was. They were not saying she wasn't, that she wasn't. They're saying she wasn't.
It's always
I'm not saying it's always her. They're saying she never was in the first place. They used that word. She never was the border czar. It's just false.
No,
it's just untrue.
That was them changing what they called her. That was Axios saying, we don't call people czars in the United States of America.
What do you mean, we don't? We do. They did. They did.
Yes, but that
if they're the we in that sentence, they did.
Right. But
and
it's not her official title.
Oh.
And so I think they recanted that because they were like, we don't want to call her something like czar in the United States.
But that's czar is a
It was a messaging thing. It was not about like what policy she's in charge of as vice president. And let's be real. She bowed out of the race pretty early on, and she ended up faring far better than the people she was running with. She ended up becoming vice president.
Because she got handpicked for that position.
Yes. And I think Biden ran 4 times for president before ultimately becoming president and getting more votes than anyone has ever gotten at the national level with 81 million. Harris was on that ticket. So I think she's already proven to be pretty electable.
Okay, we'll see. I don't know about that. She was, yes, I said that in my radar. She was on the winning ticket. There's something to say for her in that regard. But, she's going to have to demonstrate that she's not just like a California lefty. We don't know her. We don't know what her policies are. She has been invisible in the administration. I guess she doesn't want credit. You say she should be celebrating her tough on the border policies, but she doesn't want any credit for that. She doesn't want any involvement. She doesn't take any ownership of it because immigration is Trump's most winning issue. It is the issue Republicans are far and away more trusted. I'm not even talking about the actual policy of it. Like you, probably, I'm more, or I clash
You're more
most.
about the vibes.
No, I was going to say on immigration, I clash with the right more on that issue than probably any other issue because I do want to see more immigration, more legal immigration. I don't think, and I also doubt that harsher border security measures are going to actually succeed in keeping people out of this country. I don't think mass deportations are economically viable. I'm against all that stuff, regardless of where the right is. So it's not, I'm not making like a substantive policy judgment. For all I know, I agree with her, I mean, I don't think I do, but I might agree with her policies on the border more than I agree with J.D. Vance's. But the fact of the matter is the people don't. The American people are fed up with Democratic leadership of the border issue, and that includes her, whether you want to call her the czar of the border or not. By the way, czar is an unofficial term that we use all the time in American politics to describe the person in charge of fixing the problem. It's a long-running and long-standing thing.
Yeah, I
kind of like calling every controversy like X-gate since Watergate, right?
Mm-hmm. So, yes, he tasked her with handling the root causes of migration. She kept Title 42 in place if she was a part of that decision of the Biden administration, which many progressives didn't like. And I think this is the main weakness of Republicans right now, is all of their criticisms of Kamala Harris are like the same ones that Bernie staffers had of her in 2020, which doesn't make any sense because if their base wants someone who's tough on migration, theoretically they would love that Kamala Harris kept Title 42 in place if she was making decisions on the border when she was called the border czar in 2021 when the administration made the decision to keep Title 42 in place. Now we're seeing that border crossings are down dramatically. So if you want her to be detaining people at the border, if you want her to be expelling people from the United States, you theoretically would like her border policy as a conservative or a centrist.
I mean, Title 42 is no good to me because the justification for that was to keep disease from entering the country. It was like to keep COVID out, which was stupid because COVID was already in the country and impossible to prevent the spread of. So the idea that like we couldn't let people in because they might have COVID was utterly absurd. And I don't want any government expanded powers based on COVID rationales. That is a shortcut to having all of our civil liberties violated at all times, as we learned over the course of the pandemic. So I was all for not keeping that in place.
Yeah. They've reduced the number of encounters on the border by 55%. They've changed Border Patrol policy. This is a part of why they hired more border agents.
Well, when?
The
in the last,
seven-day address has decreased to below 1,800 encounters per day.
Well, do you know why that is? It's because it's summer and it's too hot. It's a cyclical thing. It goes up and down. That happens every year, and it'll go up again in the winter, particularly, most Americans feel, if Kamala Harris wins the presidency, but we shall see, I suppose. More rising.
If you look at year-over-year data, it's also down, not just seasonal movements.
Down over last year. Yeah,
yes.
that might be the case.
All right.
More
Good job,
rising
Kamala.
right after this.